Hi, thank you so much for coming to see my talk on usability in Qubes. My name is Nina, and I practice user-centered design. In 2018, the Secure Drop project invited me to work with them on their next generation product for newsrooms, a workstation for journalists built on Qubes. By the pairing? Well, a lot of reasons, most notably the ability to fudge an air gap with multiple added security remediations in a single device, which would be a not insignificant upgrade from today's multi-device experience for newsrooms, which is dependent on tails and many other maintenance and learning burdens for our newsroom users. SecureDrop is an anonymous whistleblower submission system maintained by the American nonprofit Freedom of the Press Foundation, which of course is chaired by Qubes' #1 publicly visible fan, Ed Snowdenby. Today, SecureDrop is used by over 70 media organizations and nonprofits around the world, and it has been translated into 20 different languages. In 2018, the vision for SecureDrop Workstation was established as such that should a limited pilot with a handful of newsrooms succeed, the workstation built atop Qubes would become the de facto means through which all journalists would communicate with sources through their secure drops. For Qubes, of course, that would mean being adopted by scores of journalists and newsroom IT folks across several continents. So that would be a pretty big deal, which is how I got involved in things. So 3 years later, the workstation is over a year into its pilot now. Pilot that, like with most pilots, we planned for to last 4 months. But, this whole pandemic thing happened and things changed a little bit, and that's fine. Regardless, for both SecureDrop and for Qubes, the preliminary research of ongoing work with SecureDrop users throughout the pilot has been an invaluable high-touch opportunity to learn about both SecureDrop and about Qubes through the experiences of non-technical, high-risk users profiled in the text on this slide. For our pilot work with SecureDrop and Qubes, 8 folks actively using Qubes, active meaning a few times a week probably. Most of them are full-time journalists. 2 of them are newsroom IT folks. 1 user has experience developing their own tools. 2 users are adept at using the command line, and the rest of our users are eagerly learning it, which of course was a caveat for participating in the pilot was, you need to be open to learning some new stuff. All of them are in North America, which is more a function of where, the rest of us at Freedom Press Foundation, rest of those contributors are located. All of them are also Mac users, which is also probably a byproduct of everyone being in North America. And I'm also a Mac user, to be perfectly transparent about that bias of my own. And all of the folks participating in the pilot have received Qubes training from the security trainers. So that's also a pretty different thing from a lot of Qubes users that we reached out to through surveys and phone interviews specifically. Not all of them had the privilege of being trained specifically on Qubes. So all of our pilot participants for the workstation, we've had a very high touch, regular contact sort of experience working with. Now, how about the rest of Qubes users? Well, there's 30,000 of them. So thanks to a generous fund from Mozilla last year, I was able to properly join the Qubes train as a contributor, and MARTA was funded to join me in that fund. And all of us were able to dig in together to begin structured learning and design iteration to act on those learnings, which has been great. We are also mindful that 30,000 folks kind of use and depend upon Qubes every day, not just for computing, but for also delivering a safe and predictable experience that they can depend upon. So for the SecureDrop Workstation project, my one-to-one connection with users allowed me to embrace a lot of qualitative methods for research, things that most folks tend to think of when they think of what user research might look like to them. Phone interviews, regular texting, screen sharing, their use of a new build, screen sharing, their use of a visual prototype that I might have put together. Observational activities where the user's actual behavior can be tracked. not just what folks say or communicate as their attitude towards a thing. With the large volume of Qubes users not using the workstation, methods that were quantitative in nature and collected attitudinal feedback felt as a much more vital first step, considering nothing had been done yet, and we needed to, start wide and start big. So surveys, that's how you go big in research. In October, we finally launched our first ever proper survey of Qubes users, which was pretty exciting. Unlike regular consumer products, Qubes users are not an easy group to reach with most quantitative research tooling. That said, you are all an amazing group of folks to work with, and totally everyone understands why y'all are a little hard to reach out to, which is fine. So why not just use existing communities such as GitHub and the user forums? Well, to reliably capture the attitudinal feedback of individual users, one-way communication methods are vital to accurately capturing those attitudinal insights. Because in that one-way bubble, what folks say is less likely to be influenced by how others in a community feel, and also without the self-awareness of how others might judge or respond to things that they share. Anonymity to the full Qubes team is also important at this level in collecting the attitudinal feedback. A self-hosted instance of Lime Survey, which is a free and open source survey tool, was what we decided to go with because of the anonymity and data protections offered to us through that. The work involved in distilling findings from what we learn in those surveys is still quite a bit of work. It's not, like this venture capital funded, any of the tools in Silicon Valley or whatnot that do all sorts of, AI, whatnot, that's quite invasive. There is still quite a lot of manual work involved, but Marta wrote and published a terrific report based on the first 2,200 respondents to our first survey, which has since received several thousand more responses. In the next few weeks, I look forward to posting my own report about what we learned from specifically the App Menu survey. The App Menu project, of course, being a topic that Marta and I will be presenting a shared discussion on in the next talk after this one, which I hope y'all stick around for as well. Finally, additional interviews to supplement what we've been learning as we go in the survey have also been vital to supporting this early UX work, as have been many of the conversations that have been happening with folks in our online communities such as GitHub, forums, email lists. There's all of those resources have a place. They just can't be, any of them necessarily relied upon exclusively. So what have we learned so far, both between the one-on-one qualitative work with Secure Drop Workstation users and with Qubes user surveys? Well, in our earliest research for the Secure Drop Workstation, conducted with 12 interviewees from around the world, folks of varying ages and varying technical abilities, all of whom were different folks than those who we later engaged for the pilot who themselves were already Secure Drop users, we developed a pretty good elevator, or what we thought was a pretty good elevator pitch for Qubes in those sessions to describe its value in a few minutes or less. We came to do that using these screenshots as an example, introducing it pretty much only with the dialogue of, hey, see the colored windows. Each colored window is its own virtual computer, all run by the Qubes operating system, and each has its own connectivity preferences and total isolation, better than an air gap. Now, mind you, a lot of these folks were highly non-technical journalists who had very little understanding of the technical definitions of what makes an environment secure, what exactly an air gap is, but most of them generally understood the nature of the concepts themselves. And much to our surprise, users got it. This may have been because of the credibility for security insight that Freedom of the Press Foundation carries with it, as they're the folks that run Secure Drop, who did all the outreach for this research. So participants were coming into the research knowing, oh, hey, we're working with Freedom of the Press Foundation. But regardless, they got it, and that was really exciting. People were really excited by it too, and if I'm being honest, I was really excited when I learned about Qubes. And by the way, hats off to our user community for putting together a really, really, really funny group in the Qubes forums. If you haven't checked out the Qubes memes, I highly recommend it. But this little one right here with Elmo, I think really nicely summarized how I initially responded to Qubes, and frankly how a lot of users responded to Qubes when we gave them the elevator pitch of like, hey, this thing exists and we're going to be building a thing on it. Would that interest you? And it really interested a lot of very non-technical journalist users because, you know, their work does, you know, create a lot of risk for them, and they are quite vulnerable to a lot of the stuff that Qubes mitigates against. So what have we learned so far more tangibly between both the one-on-one qualitative work with the Secure Web Workstation users and with the Qubes user surveys? Well, for starters, in our first survey, a clear majority of the respondents identified as nerds. Not in that language, but, you know, with the identified skill sets that I have listed over, I think it's my left as I'm sitting here, but probably my right as you're looking at it on the screen. Most folks identified as either being skilled at writing code or the people that their friends go to for help. These are some sort of generalized parameters I developed quite a while ago to measure technical savviness with. Technical savviness at the level that most Qubes users are technically adept is not a standard thing that a lot of user researchers ask about. So this was a little hard to develop some measures on, but this was kind of where we started. Between this survey and the app menu specific survey, users also made it very clear that they strongly desired better GUI tools and a preference for using UI tools over a complete dependence on the command line. This is one graph, again, from our first survey, but a similar question was used in the app menu survey. And in both surveys, a host of free text responses were also included, citing everything from aesthetics and, you know, I want a prettier UI, I want a UI with animations, you know, stuff that's pretty out of the question, but it was, you know, I think the broadest sentiment was, you know, we'd really like to be able to access things in the GUI that are currently command line only accessible or are just really difficult to find in the GUI. People want simpler usability and access to functionality that they don't have, who are among the core Qubes user group. Only 1/3 of the survey respondents were running Qubes today in the first survey. Again, Marta published a great write-up of the survey. I recommend folks take a peek at it if they're interested. That was published at the 2,200 mark. We've since gotten to the 6,700 respondents mark. A majority of those responses folks who are new or returning to Qubes after having taken some time off from Qubes. Having quickly taken a look at the newer responses over the past couple weeks, video conferencing has emerged as a new COVID normal sort of cited need. Otherwise, responses provided feedback consistent with what we've been receiving before. Sticking with the default desktop environment is what most folks are doing, with the majority who switch choosing a tiling desktop environment such as i3. A strong need for Windows 10 was also cited, as was a desire for gaming, both to enable folks to keep their total number of owned devices low while multitasking hardware needs, which of course possibly also kind of added to the list that folks want more powerful and more desirable. The desire was the word that I'd used in the survey, so that can, you know, be interpreted by a lot of things. But among folks who gave Qubes a try and gave up, the learning burdens were often cited as reasons why. And of course, if folks who are tuning in right now watched last week's sessions, Deeplow's doing some really exciting work on a tutorial that I'm hoping can alleviate that burden, and he also did some great user research in support of that work. Hardware compatibility and availability, also really big problems, as well as many folks coming to our open source product desiring a consumer product experience and flustered that Qubes isn't able to offer that. well, you know, we're all really proud and we try. Coming back to more of the qualitative work I've been doing with our Secure Job Workstation folks on Qubes, some of those themes reflect what we've learned in the survey. High learning curve for core concepts, not just of security, but also with Linux. Remember, all of our North American journalists are Mac users. And while trained on security concepts by Free the Press Foundation or other independent trainers, the Linux and information security learning curves were quite significant. As far as the UI itself is concerned, most of what I'd qualify as paper cuts really sort of emerged to be the problems. Now, paper cuts. In our earliest sessions observing users with the Secure Job Workstation, interacting with a prototype I put together via screen sharing, the concept of attaching a device really stood out to the team as one likely to be problematic when using a workstation built on Qubes. Sure, those of us over 40, of course, remember having to mount devices, mount drives a million years ago, but those workflows were still pretty different. Time was invested then putting together a small tutorial, of which is a screen right here, that much to our surprise, users did not need to copiously study or did not feel the need to copiously study. The first version was a multi-screen, step-by-step guide that we eventually updated to be this single screen version that you're seeing here. Small interactions such as the flyout panes arrows pointing one way and the flyout spawning the other direction, as well as users needing to find the little plus symbols to click on the little plus symbol instead of being able to click on the entire sort of line item object. Fussy, small, not exactly micro interactions, but small interactions stood out as the greater problems that were more paper cutty. Block device names in today's widget, those had really stood out to myself and others on the team as like, oh, this could be problematic. But folks were surprisingly able to figure those out and just kind of pushed through it, which was really great to see. Now, the strangeness of the app menu stood out to many, however. The redundant prefixes on cube names, disposable, domain, template, a little confusing, as well as the sea of rainbow padlocks. Why are the templates visible if they're a thing that, the app cubes are built off of? Today's app menu caused a lot of confusion as well. And also, why is there a second queue in the tray menu up there when I open this from a menu with a queue kind of over there? The strangeness of the of there being a secondary queue menu being necessary to see the RAM usage among active cubes, also stood out. Which cubes are running and how to shut them all down also seemed odd to be in the secondary cube menu. Of course, this was something that folks picked up on once they started using cubes. So this was not our prototype users that I was speaking to a few slides ago, but folks who are properly now in the pilot once they're working with their cubes machines and trying to learn, how do I keep it from crashing? And I want to open this thing up. How do I look for this information? This secondary queue menu, felt a little odd. The Secure Job Workstation is built to run on a Tor connection, so Unix is definitely factored into the workstation heavily, and Tor being Tor, it occasionally does need to be restarted because it can get slow and whatnot. And this menu also stood out as a very confusing thing for most folks. Now, for this piece of the Qubes UI, a community contributor was generous enough to build this feature themselves. So please also take my insight with a grain of salt that this was confusing for our users. It's again feedback from users, from folks actually using the product, not at all sentiment towards a developer who generously built the feature on their own dime. But folks looking for a Tor widget and coming upon the functionality that this presents, did definitely confuse a lot of folks. And now one of my favorite windows, this one. A user picks copy file to another VM in the file manager and gets an operation execution window with a giant question mark and a command line operation named. And what does this mean? In accumulation, all of these little things add up, and that's why we call them paper cuts. There's no malice, there's no ill intent. Developers care about users passionately, and every single person on the core Qubes team and that I've met in the Qubes community totally cares about users passionately. It is a finding of this work, however, that all these little paper cuts, they do add up. Which brings us to how all of this is now synthesized into design principles. Coming back to what user-centered design is and how it works, all of the iteration on ideas and research combined contributed to building these design principles as central tenets that the whole community can work with. Hypervisor first. This is a sketch of the Valentina App Menu, which Marta is building, and we will be discussing, or Marta will be discussing her implementation of in the next talk. This is a sketch, of course, that shows the search functionality that is not being built into this first version of it, but it does show a lot of other stuff, such as templates, service VMs, and app VMs all being separated. You can see which VMs are running. You can see the Qube controls in the flyout menu. You can see the connection status up at the top corner. All of these little things, hypervisor first, building unique tools that are specific to the Qubes hypervisor model and also specific to Qubes. Seeing the template that a disposable VM was spawned from, lots of little nuggets like that. Next up, mental models. What is a mental model? Quoting the below article in the link there from Nielsen Norman Group, one of usability's biggest dilemmas is the common gap between a designer's and a user's mental models. This being an open source project, and could be a designer or developer. Because designers know too much, they form wonderful mental models of our own creations, leading designers to believe that each feature is either inherently easy to understand or can be easily learned should the user take the time to invest in learning the right concepts. Of course, the latter is a common sentiment observed by myself and my UX peers who work in InfoSec, but I've been there, we've all been there. Mental models are hard for users, and this is one of the things that requires the most amount of user research, is to figure out what are the cues and what are the things that are really going to help users build their mental model of how a system works. This diagram, I think, is really great, of course, to kind of really dumb down and explain what is a mental model. It's people having an idea in their head of behavior and the result and the reinforcement in that behavior, and it all goes around in a cycle to kind of, over and over again reinforce how something works. My first contribution to the project, kind of on the front of mental models put to work, is the Qube icon family, which I'm really proud of, and is now built into 4.1. I initially created these icons feeling a need to do something about all those padlocks that struck me as so out of place. So when something that could more readily speak to what this ecosystem of Qubes is all about and work better in service to the user's comprehension of, this whole ecosystem, instead of constantly trying to get past, why all the colored padlocks? They're cubes. The service cube is a utility thing, a pass-through of sorts. The app cube being the whole cube, the disappearing cube, the template cube. Damo is the king cube or the queen cube, so it gets the crown. And of course, standalone cubes, which are not currently implemented in 4.1, but we look forward to be implementing in a near-term update. Number 3, reduction of cognitive burden. I have come to love the notification bubbles on Qubes, and to be perfectly honest, I wish my Mac would give me more of these. I would love to know what's going on, even though Apple would probably not want me to know what's going on. But regardless, this is a lot of text to show a user in an ephemeral notification bubble. Put to work, what really needs to be communicated to a user over and over again as to not burden their cognitive fatigue, help the user develop an awareness of their system without overwhelming their working memory such that they miss important things. So yes, the learning stuff of, how to cut and paste in Qubes is really important, but what are things that the user really should be seeing over and over and over again? Keep it minimal. Semiotics or symbols. Clear semiotics, clear hierarchies. Why is there a globe with a clock on it for Unix, as an example? I mean, I know why, you know why, we all know clock skew and time sync, but most users, especially average non-technical users, do not know what time sync is. So got to cut them a little bit of a break as well. Why is there a second Q icon instead of, a more intuitive domain-specific icon? What is the exploding orange blob? If I'm coming to Qubes from GNOME, I'll know that's their updater icon. But if I'm not coming into Qubes from GNOME, that's just the orange splody icon. Not enough space between icons also makes it harder to understand where one begins and where another ends. So that's part of why hierarchy is important. Also, this is work I did supporting an accessibility award that Qubes received, and in it I eliminated many icons and instead utilized semiotics in typography to represent what is running, what is not running, a cube that is frozen, while also repurposing the recycle icon to emit the semiotic that most users often associate with that symbol, which is simply there's an update that needs to happen, not that the cube needs to be restarted because an update already happened to the template. There's an alert icon that is the more common semiotic for the latter that went into that work. My favorite window again, the one that really confused me, and plain language. That is probably the most global thing that could be assigned is, what I feel needs, being fixed with this window as well. Consistent terms of art and really being picky about what terms of art are selected and put in front of users. What could be communicated in plainer language? Identify that. Communicate as much as possible with really clear icons, symbols, GPG key, moving something, copying something, and be really mindful to speak to Qube-specific and security-specific concepts consistently and specifically. Intercube activities are an important bucket of activities that are not currently spoken to consistently in the UI, and doing that more often would definitely be a great usability boost for Qubes. Contextual information, we need it. This example is for an old sketch of the app menu that goes with the hypervisor first concept. RAM is important to users in the context of opening more VMs or more apps in that VM that are running most of the time. Locating the cube's available disk use, what template a cube is running off of, and its connection status are also desirable things for users to see in the context of opening a new app in a running VM or a new VM altogether. Contextual information again. This also an early sketch for the app menu, but this is a different take on contextual information where the user can access all of this from the app menu, but it's not shown in the context of a specific VM. 7. Influence quick, intentional, and informed decisions. Hey, there's 3 security updates for me to install. No need to click on the menu or to open the installer to see that information. Some more early ideas for me that are not at all iterated on with feedback from others, but again, just sharing these only to build upon the concept of design principles and how design principles at work are expressed. Look, it's that tour menu I was thinking would be really great. to see when I first started using Qubes, and then based more on difficulty that I was experiencing, or that I was observing the users I was working with experience. Clipboard. What is in my global clipboard right now, and which VM did it come from? Again, another idea based off of observing users struggling. Copy the DOM-O clipboard stands out as well in this mock-up in blue as a clear and easy action. And if I need guidance on how to use Qubes' clipboard or the individual VM clipboards, there's a little progressive disclosure help feature built in, and a whole other feature called Safe Paste, which I thought of a couple of years ago and may actually exist as one of the policy options today. I'm still learning about policies. Finally, coming back to the devices widget, this is what I imagined could have made more sense to users in a small design tantrum after one of my earliest rounds of work with users back in my 2018 user testing sessions for the Secure App Workstation. So this has been some design principles at work, design principles being a synthesis of a lot of the things that I've been learning from users in my early user research work for Qubes. Thank you for taking the time to join me. If you'd like to see some clickable resources from the talk, there's a link up there, and I'll see you in the Q&A.